Hi everyone, this is a follow-up to our first class today, February 2nd. Most everyone made it to class, and I thank you very much for doing that. I apologize that there were a few students that were unable to find the passcode or password to enter our Zoom meeting, our Zoom class. And I had thought that I had set that and was readily available to all students, but apparently not. So in any event, here we are. I will be preparing for you, for those students particularly who weren't able to be with us today during our first class meeting, but also for those who were there who would benefit from a review and some visual cues on the things that we talked about today, which were the introduction to the course, including course learning outcomes. I will, in that short video, cover skills developed and used in this course. We did cover the cautionary warning that will be repeated in the recorded version. And then central questions and powerful concepts that help frame our work together. Whenever we get way out there in criminal law, we can always come back to what is the material we're covering? How does it relate to the central questions in criminal law? That introduction will also include an orientation to the Canvas site, a review of the syllabus, including course policies and expectations. So that's a separate video that I will record tomorrow and send you a notification on. For today, for right now, what I'm recording is our information on Chapter 1 course learning outcomes and what you need to be ready for our second class meeting, which is Thursday the 2nd at 10 o'clock. Some of you, those of you who are in section 1 will be remote on Zoom. Those of you who are in section 1B will be in class face-to-face with me. And I look forward to meeting you all face-to-face. Thank you for your patience today, and things will improve, I'm sure, as I become more experienced with using Zoom, this being my first class that I've taught and delivered on Zoom as opposed to using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra in my prior online teaching experience. So here we go. What I want you to know going into Chapter 1 is what you will be able to do or should be able to do at the end of the chapter. So we'll talk about where and how does criminal law fit into criminal justice. There's police, there's courts, there's corrections. How does criminal law fit into all of that? Who does what? Federal and state criminal law, we'll talk about both bodies of law and also recognize that there are 50 states in the United States, 50 different bodies of criminal law, lots of similarities, but likewise lots of variations that impact on the administration of justice in criminal cases across all 50 states. And also the District of Columbia has its own set of criminal laws. We'll talk about the role of federal, state, and local law criminal justice agencies, the three branches of government being the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And for those of you who need a review, the legislative branch makes the law for the most part. Substantive criminal law, what is a crime, how can it be punished, is as a general proposition, predominantly determined by the legislature of the jurisdiction. Therefore, Congress of the United States determines what will be a crime against the United States and what the punishment for that crime may be if a person is found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Likewise, at the state level, anything that's a crime against the state in all 50 states, predominantly but not exclusively, is determined by the legislative branch of government. So in Massachusetts, our state legislature votes on whether or not to change the law to make something a crime, to describe what the elements or what needs to be proven by the prosecution in order to get a conviction of that for that crime, and what the sentence can be, the maximum, the minimum, if any, that can be imposed under state law. So the legislative branch is primarily involved in the making of criminal law. It's augmented or added to by other sources of criminal law that we'll cover in Chapter 1. The executive branch, their job is not to make the law. That's the legislative branch's job. The executive branch, working under the President of the United States in our federal system, under the governor in the states and our state system, the executive branch function is to enforce the law. So state and local law enforcement are part of the executive branch of state government. Federal law enforcement is under the executive branch of government. And then thirdly, the judicial branch. We have 50 different state court systems. We have one federal system. And the role of the judicial system is to provide a process for determining the outcome of criminal cases and also civil cases. But for our purposes, adjudicating is the word that is used, adjudicating disputes about whether or not the government has or can prove a person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and providing the protections, all of the protections that we'll talk about in Chapter 1 that are due to any person charged with a crime under our due process rights that are extremely important in protecting the rights of criminally accused and promoting fairness and public confidence in our legal system or the judicial branch of our criminal justice system. We'll talk about how each branch of the, as I just did, we'll talk in greater detail about how the legislative, executive, and judicial branches perform their roles, how they're interrelated, how one relies on the other. We will then turn to the subject of the four major sources of criminal law. Statutes, the laws passed, the laws passed by the legislative branch of government, Congress of the United States for federal crimes, state legislatures for state crimes. That is a very important source of criminal law. Constitutional law pertains much more greatly to the process or the adjudication of a criminal case than it does to what is a crime and what is not a crime. Statutes, again, that's the law that's passed by the legislative branch of a particular government. Federal government, Congress, state government, the state legislature. Those decisions or those statutes, those laws that are enacted through the political process of a legislative branch also oftentimes have to have some additional interpretation. That interpretation of what the statute means and how it works is determined by the judicial branch, and the judicial branch of government, both federal and state, makes law in the form of appellate court decisions saying, as I said, interpreting and applying the statutes in criminal cases. We'll talk about the doctrine of stare decisis, which is the very fundamental idea that for purposes of order and predictability and stability in our criminal, in our legal system, both criminal and civil, we need to, people need to be confident or rely upon the decisions of federal and state appellate court decisions to guide their decisions going forward. Those decisions can change. They do change, but until the court overrules itself, or a higher court overrules it. The law, the case law, the opinions rendered by an appellate court are binding on the jurisdiction. So Massachusetts appellate court decisions are binding on criminal law, the adjudication of criminal cases in the state of Massachusetts. Federal criminal law, federal common law, the appellate court decisions of Federal Appeals Court, U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court bind both federal criminal cases and state criminal cases. Less important is administrative rules and regulations. We'll then turn to classification of crimes in Massachusetts. There's three basic ways, as we'll see, that crimes can be classified in any given state by the subject matter. Is it a crime against a person? Is it a crime against property? Is it a crime against the administration of justice, such as perjury under oath or bribery of a judge? Is it a crime against drugs and controlled substances? Is it a crime against operating under the influence of drugs and alcohol? Is it a crime against or inchoate crimes? Those things that individuals have taken some steps toward completing a crime, but they haven't fully completed it. So subject matter is certainly one way, and we'll look at the way in which Massachusetts organizes all of its crimes by subject matter. A second way of classification of crimes that we'll talk about in Chapter 1 is by the seriousness of the punishment. So the punishment for a particular state or federal crime, as it's determined most always by statute, will state a maximum and sometimes, always a maximum, sometimes a minimum mandatory punishment. And depending upon what that punishment is for a person convicted of the federal or state crime, it is classified as either a felony or a misdemeanor, or in Massachusetts, in many states, there's sort of an overlap category, and we'll learn about that. We'll talk about the constitutional limitations on the enactment. The legislative branch enacts the law, the executive branch enforces the law, the judicial branch adjudicates, decides disputes about federal and state criminal law. And we'll see that there are some limits written into the Constitution, which was ratified in 1789, that affect what a legislature can enact, how it can be enforced, and how it can be adjudicated. Those are pretty far and few between. Far greater in number are the amendments to the United States Constitution that talk about enactment, enforcement, and adjudication of both federal and state criminal laws. The Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure applies to predominantly the law enforcement agencies at the federal and state level. Those are part of the executive branch. How can they go about investigating a crime, making searches, seizures, arrests, stops, and frisks? That is the body of law called constitutional law under the Fourth Amendment, and it's both the Constitution and courts' interpretation, specifically the United States Supreme Court's interpretation of what those words in the Constitution mean. Likewise, Fifth Amendment rights that provide procedural protections against any criminal case, federal or state, and as a matter of fundamental fairness. A very large, umbrella under which many rights fall that are not specifically articulated in the Constitution are rights under the Fifth and 14th Amendment right to due process of law. That will take up one or two classes that we cover in Chapter 1. Sixth Amendment rights, again, predominantly featuring protections of individuals who've been brought into the adjudication process in a federal or state criminal case. The Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment applies in terms of whether in the enactment of a law, whether or not the punishment imposed by the statute, federal or state, can withstand a test under Eighth Amendment U.S. constitutional prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. We'll look at equal protection of the law under the 14th Amendment. Basically, that says, provides protections from what the either federal or state legislative branch can make a crime, and how it can be enforced. Among the protections that come under that umbrella of the 14th Amendment is obviously, or maybe not so obviously, we'll talk about how crime, making something a crime when committed by a Caucasian person but not a Black or African American person would be a clear violation of the 14th Amendment. Of course, historically, it's more often been that states have made certain conduct criminal if engaged in by people of color, specifically Blacks and African Americans, but not criminalize that behavior when it applies to Caucasians or white Americans. That's a clear violation of equal protection. We will see that the United States Supreme Court has made decisions that says, look, just because you want to make something a crime doesn't mean you get to do so without any limitations at all. And so the right to privacy, which includes under Supreme Court decisions, the right, for example, to consensual homosexual adult sexual behavior, used to be a crime in many states. Most the landmark decisions coming out of Texas for adult consenting adults to engage in homosexual sexual activity. That has been ruled a violation, and the right to privacy, adults should be able, according to the United States Supreme Court, to engage in consensual private, not out in the street. You can't be having sex out in the street, whether you're a bisexual or other, whatever your sexual orientation is. Sorry, it's been a long day. Sexual conduct in public space is prohibited regardless of the sexual orientation of the people engaging in it. Criminal laws also cannot violate against free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and we will see some of that tested in the current criminal cases that have been brought against by the United States of America against several of the people who entered the Capitol on January 6th and engaged in behavior which will test the bounds of what is free speech, what is freedom of assembly, what is freedom of association, and what is the right of or the duty to protect the public and our democratic process outweigh a person's right to say or do whatever he or she would like. The First Amendment is not without limits. It is a very broad amendment, but it does have limits, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Obviously, the Second Amendment right to bear arms is an issue in any state or under federal law that attempts to regulate the ownership or bearing, carrying, open or not carrying firearms is subject to a challenge under the Second Amendment, and that would fall under equal protection. We then will turn to why do we need laws? Why are they important? And why is criminal law in particular something that we really we need to even worry about? Obviously, as criminal justice or law and society majors, this is an important question for you. We'll talk about the 7 goals of criminal law. We will then spend some time on understanding what is a crime, because not everything that we think is bad or immoral is a crime. Many things are bad and or what we would individually classify as bad or that we want to discourage or immoral or certainly unkind. Those things are not necessarily a crime. We'll look at 2 types of crime: substantive criminal law, which is the law which defines what is a crime and how it can be punished. So in Massachusetts, assault and battery is the unlawful touching of another person without their consent. That's substantive criminal law. Procedural criminal law is focused on how law enforcement, the executive branch of federal and state government, investigates a report of or a observation of a potential criminal law. We'll talk about the difference between deviance and crime and how criminal laws change. Deviance is things that are out beyond our norms, things that most of us think you shouldn't do. So sneezing without covering your nose, or perhaps more appropriate to our circumstances, not wearing a mask in public would be or could be, is considered deviant in many communities, not all. It is not a criminal act. Some believe it should be, but as of now, it is not. We'll look at two models of how society determines what should be a crime and what should not. One is the consensus or the pluralist model. The other is the conflict or the interest group model. Excuse me. For those of you who have taken crime theory or criminology, you most likely are familiar with those models, and this will be a nice refresher for you, or not so nice refresher. We will then learn how to find the criminal law, both in federal criminal law and state criminal law, so that you'll know how to find it, should you have the need to do that, and it's an important skill and a powerful tool to know, I can look that up, I know where I can find that. Then we will look at the distinctions between civil and criminal law. There are important distinctions. Certainly the standards or levels of proof we'll spend some time on, with a level of proof that needs to be brought forward to convince a judge in the case of a bench trial or a jury in the case of a jury trial. In a civil case is preponderance of the evidence. It's about 50-50 and a plus an eyelash. It's very close, just a little bit more than 50-50. In criminal cases, the standard of proof is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And we'll play with that a little bit about what does that mean? How do you know whether you have a reasonable doubt? Are the instructions judges give juries sufficient to guide them in administering the charge with which they have been vested? We'll talk about burden of proof. Who has to prove it? Does the government have to prove the defendant is sane? Or does the defendant have to prove that he or she is insane to be successful in a defense of insanity in those states that recognize it, which is 46 out of 50 states. The last thing we'll cover in this very long chapter are critical elements of crime. Every crime is made up of four things: a criminal act, doing something that the law prohibits, or failing to do something that the law requires; criminal intent, different kinds of intent; concurrence, the act and the intent will have to occur at the same time for it to be a crime; and then legal causation. So chapter 1 is a very long chapter. It could easily be 2 chapters. We will cover it over a span of time. It is the foundation on which we will build when we dive into specific types of crimes, starting in chapter 2 with homicide crimes. So buckle up. It's a good ride, and you'll be doing a lot of work. Part of that in chapter 1, we'll look at what can be a criminal act as is commission. Doing something the law says you can't do. Can't kill somebody without justification or excuse. You're going to be held criminally responsible. It's a criminal homicide. Whether it's murder or manslaughter, we'll figure that out in chapter 2. Sometimes the failure to act. There's a duty to act. A parent has a duty by reason of special relationship to provide at least minimal nutrition and safety and health care and emotional well-being for a child. Possession of certain things is illegal. You don't have to use them. You just have them in your possession, and it's illegal. Certain firearms without the proper documentation, certainly drugs and other controlled substances. And then we'll look in detail at criminal intent, the 4 different types of intent, which, for example, in murder, the difference between first and second degree murder and between murder and manslaughter is going to basically fall down to, or come down to, what level of intent did the person who caused the death have. Now, how that's going to be proved is another story, but the specific intent elements as it's determined by the judicial branch in Massachusetts or the judicial branch of any state government is often focused on intent. Okay, what you need to know, what's due today, 2 places that you will find what's due for our class on Thursday. One is in the course syllabus, and the other is in the chapter checklist. I am going to attempt to bring up and share with you the course syllabus. Hang with me for a minute. Okie dokie. Okay. What's due for our second class? This is based on this can be found in 2 places. One, in the section of the syllabus called course schedule. It is also in chapter 1 in the under the title of oh gosh, sorry, it's been a long day. I've been up for 12 hours. It is in the course syllabus, chapter 1, in under the category of sorry, bear with me. I'm sorry, it is in in each chapter there is a segment of the materials on Canvas which tells you what is due for in this chapter. And so 2 places that you can find the same information: the course schedule in the syllabus, or on Canvas in by chapter the information on what's due in each class. For our class on Thursday, you are required to read the textbook, pages 1 through 16, prepare the course connection activity, prepare the on introducing yourself, prepare the connect with your group members, and do the homework assignment, which you can find all 3 of those things. Course, 4. Textbook, course connection activity on introducing yourself, course connection activity on connecting with group members, and the homework are all located in the chapter 1 on Canvas. Okay, so here you see chapter 1, the learning outcomes, the checklist. That's what I was thinking of that I couldn't quite remember at this point. The checklist is here. That will have what's due for each class. The second option is to use the course schedule in the syllabus. The introduction to the chapter is what I'm doing now. The textbook is located always in each chapter. Chapter 1, readings and videos. It starts with the textbook, and then any required other required reading and videos as noted in the checklist and in the what's due today column in the course schedule will be within the chapter. What's due for class on Tuesday is homework number 1. So in Canvas, please go to chapter 1, scroll down to homework. Make sure you're following the instructions that are here. If you click on this homework assignment, it will give you specific directions on what questions I would like you to answer. And it must be word processed, as you can see. And you need to present it in question and answer format. Your name and the homework number needs to be at the top of the Word document, please. Otherwise, there's no way for me to really know who is submitting it. And please use the assignment link that is provided when you click on homework. The other 2 things that are due for class on Thursday are to do the course connection activity. Introduce yourself. Again, if you click on it, there's very specific directions on what I'm asking you to do, how to submit it using the assignment link, and connect with your group members is the third thing, the third item that you will be submitting for grading. Those are all due by 9:30 on Thursday, February 4th. And please be mindful, and I will reiterate this in the video that I'm going to provide on the overview of the course and the policies and procedures in the course. These items are due by the time and the date stated. It's February 4th at 9:30 for both of them. If they are late, I do accept course and connection activities late. They're subject to a maximum, they're subject to an automatic loss of points and a maximum of 75% of what you would have otherwise earned. So I will be forgiving for this first class, but our second class, but after these items, that late policy will apply strictly. If they're there within 48 hours, or within whatever the period is that they are allowed to be filed late, they'll be graded, but they will be graded at a substantial discount in recognition of the fact that we all have opportunities and choices to make, and it's not easy to be a college student. I get it. I really do get it. Okay, homework does not enjoy that same late policy. So after Thursday's class, any homework which is due, which will be for the dates that you see here and as shown in the course syllabus, if they're not posted following the directions by 9:30 on the day of the due date, then they are a 0. The good news is your lowest 20%, or framed a different way, only your highest 80% of your homework assignments are factored into your final grade. So if you've got 0s for a few assignments, you will not be penalized in your final grade. All right, I think that's all I've got for you. It's been a long day. Thank you for your patience today. Hopefully I'll get better at using Zoom, and I'll see you all on Thursday, either in person or remotely. Thanks again. Take care.